Christina and Otto have been colleagues for several years and have a tradition of sharing weekly coffee and conversations on learning and teaching whenever possible. So, and I think the whole Provocation is kind of based on these weekly coffees, and let's see, I'm very curious. Christina Moon is an associate professor of fashion studies in the School of Art and Design History and Theory at Parsons School of Design, the New School in New York. Her most recent project on the wardrobe explores the interplay of image, clothing, text, and textiles through diaspora, exile, and longing. She is author of Labor and Creativity in New York's Global Fashion Industry, with essays in Vestoy, the Journal of Territorial Matters. And Otto von Busch is Professor of Integrated Design at Parsons School of Design. In his research, he explores how the powers of fashion can be bent to achieve a positive personal and social condition with which every person is free to grow to their full potential. So I hand it over to you. Welcome, Christina and Otto.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I really want to thank the organizers, the members of the circle, and everybody's here participating in this really incredible, incredible conference. I've not ever attended anything like it. I've learned so much in these last 2 days, and I'm full of so much gratitude and for this opportunity to have a conversation and share it with all of you. I hope there'll be some time afterwards for you also to participate in our conversation. And yes, Otto, it's very great to see you.
Hello.
Hello, how the computer screen can collapse, geography, continents, time, all of that to bring us together. It's quite incredible. As Franziska mentioned, Otto and I have a long-time friendship. We were actually hired at Parsons in the same year, maybe, I probably don't want to date myself, 13 years ago or something like that. And our weekly lunches and gatherings for the fashion praxis group has really sustained me in my own practice and writing and thinking and being with students at our university. Yesterday I ran into Timo Rissanen. He was also part of our weekly lunch group for over a decade, and he's now moved on to another institution in Australia. And if he were here today, Otto, I would have brought him into the conversation too. But just feeling so lucky to be in the space. The conversation that Otto and I will have, which is also around the themes of the conference, is titled Fashion and Vitality. And I would really love for us to start speaking and thinking about what this word might actually mean for us when it comes to fashion. Otto, do you want to say a few words before I maybe start with my first question?
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you for having me in this odd format, but and of course I would have loved to be in Berlin. It seems like such an amazing arrangement and such a new take on how a conference works, which I think is so desperately needed. And I'm sorry that I cannot be with you all. I would have sent big hugs to a lot of you. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Franziska. I mean, the whole team for pulling this together. It's really amazing. Yes, let's.
Otto, this word vitality, I think it's something I have to stop and think about actually every moment, even though I live it, when it comes to fashion. And I feel it's a word that in these 15 years I read throughout actually all of your work. The word vitality, the word aliveness when it comes to fashion. And as we know throughout this conference, in these last 2 days, we've been really, in all these different encounters, have been expanding these words that really have been circulating quite a bit when we think of the word fashion, which is sustainable or sustainability, circular, slowness, transparency, to address the overconsumption of goods and the destruction of our planet, all of that. But when I hear this word vitality, I suddenly feel a very deep sense of hope. And I want to know, I think this is a word that you begin with, and I want to know what you think of this word and how you've come across it. A fashion that seeks life, as you write. And I want to know, what were you living and experiencing or reading or doing to arrive at this word when it comes to fashion aliveness? And why do you think for you this might be a good starting point?
Well, thank you, Christina. And this is a great starting point, really, because I mean, for some of you who know my work, it's now 15 years since I published Fashionable, my thesis, where I tried to sort of question this idea that why are we so focused on fashionable goods in the realm of fashion education and fashion? Like, how could we think of that we are producing instead or cultivating fashion abilities? And how would it be? How would we train and teach fashion or young fashion designers if they've thought of their work a little bit more like a service profession, if you want to say so, you know, thinking that it's not so much about you and your creative vision. Of course, it is still there, but you also serve a population, you serve a community. And how would that just change if you would really see people and you would really see what they need and what they ask for and where their dissatisfaction and suffering is, in a sense. And the longer I worked on my work after my thesis, and on participation, justice issues, inclusivity, the more frustrated I felt by how limited our sense of what we define as fashion is, and how blunt our tools are to think what fashion could be. It seems we always discuss how to sustain, make circular, make more transparent, etc., the existing system. And it's so hard for us to think beyond the existing industry and what I sort of call the sort of the default fashion. I play with this idea that it's a little bit like the default settings on so many of our programs that could do so much more, but we only go for this very limited sort of scope of the full potential of what a thing could be, or a program on the software or something like that. So I arrived at vitality because I felt frustrated that we need, how can we move our vision and our horizon of potential beyond the existing system? And I did this in this little sort of self-published book of Vital Vogue, if you remember that. It's now a few years back, but I thought, like, how could we really think of fashion as an emotion in the body? And that is what we define. And also fashion as an energy. It's the excitement I feel when fashion really works for me. That is what we should define as fashion, not what the industry is or what the coolest drop is or whatever, but the feeling in someone's body. Because that would just shift our perspective from the system and what some people at the top say, and look at what excites you. I can come up to someone and ask them, what is fashion for you? What is it that actually excites your body and makes you feel alive when fashion works at its very best? And how do we move the discussion on sustainability from just sort of sustaining the system to do something that fashion does at its very best? And we should not sort of, keep our eyes to the ground only, but really try to lift our gaze to what fashion could be. And aliveness is there then something that I felt was something that we could find outside of the fashion system too. And this also sort of matches, I know this, there's discussions around sort of degrowth and how can we think of degrowth when it comes to fashion? And I always use the example of the hairdresser in a sense of how to imagine, or how I imagine degrowth, meaning that you go to the hairdresser and you go with more hair and you leave with less hair. You come to a service that actually takes material away from you, but you leave feeling reinvigorated. I feel like I'm ready for my date. I feel I'm ready for my job interview. I feel refreshed, and I feel, I'm pampered, and I'm just, hopefully, if it works well, I'm just a little bit more alive coming out of the hairdresser. But I leave with less material. How can we think of a fashion service, fashion store, whatever, where you come in with a bag of clothes and you leave with less clothes? That is, to me, and you feel more alive. And to me, that is sort of how one vision, in a sense, of how we can think of degrowth, in the sense of, like, the service and the experience of thriving is still there, but the material decoupling is very sort of, they're not sort of coupled material-wise. But so coming back to just aliveness, that is just like, I felt like that was a useful lens to sort of move our vision from the existing system into something that gets us to talk about when fashion really works, when fashion does it, what it's supposed to be doing. How can we focus on doing that better, serving more people, more population, a wider population with that experience, and feel that we as designers are exploring something else than sort of this enormous industrial, unjust, in so many ways, horrible systems, that we also need to, like, where can we put our creativity? How can we feel that we're still creating something amazing? Yeah, okay, sorry, that was, but that's how I came to these things.
Yeah. Otto, I have a list of 6 questions, and now, after what you just said, I have about 100 more.
That's how our Wednesdays are.
That's how it always is when we have our coffee, yes. Okay. So vitality in fashion, the vibrancy and exuberance of life. That's, when I first read that, this word vitality in this book, Vistas of Vitality, I think that's where my mind went. What is the exuberance of life when it comes to fashion? And as I read further into the book, and you were also talking about industrial models, in my mind, because I think more first, maybe I head towards kind of, maybe because of my training, theory and philosophy, I was thinking of writers that we have actually read together, Walter Benjamin, Hannah Arendt, Giorgio Agamben. I swear I'm not just trying to name drop these heavy hitters. But we've talked also in past about how they, through the times they lived in, really tried to make distinctions between, biological life as defined as biological. And in my head, when I read it in terms of fashion, I think of industry and the industrial, into actually something that they wanted to define beyond that. They wanted to also really, really distinguish this from the political life and the spiritual life, the emotional life, the sensual life, and the eroticness and playfulness that actually happens in daily life as we actually live it. And you call it vital forces in your writing. So I want to ask you if you could give us vital forces maybe beyond the fashion industry, even though we do make the critique and hold it and act on it. But what might trigger the aliveness? Could you give us some examples of things that you have written or thought about in your practice and in your writing and thinking that could give us some examples of the vital forces that trigger aliveness in fashion?
Again, sort of metaphors that I use is, in a sense, just to sort of get my students on the same page, is that, we usually sort of, differ between clothes and fashion in some sense, and I use, the bakery as an example, that, the bread and the sort of the mere nourishment that you get, that is sort of the bread, that is the clothes in that sense, and fashion is the sugar, that little extra that is not necessary. We will survive well without it, and we can't only eat it, but it gives us sort of that little sweetness to life. It is that little exuberance that we meet at the bakery, At the same time, we also may encourage it in the sense of just training our senses to aliveness. I think it's easy to think that aliveness has to be, oh, I go bungee jumping, or I do this kind of, extreme senses of getting adrenaline rush, or it has to be like, orgasm after orgasm, or, whatever, something that is just like total sort of exuberance of life. But I think to me, it's also about this kind of, how do we train our sensibilities to just the smallest pleasures, but that still makes us feel that the day is more than just any day, that, and of course, again, there's class issues, there's a lot of issues around this, and who has this, which classes are allowed to do this, there's normatives issues around this and so on, but one can also think of it as this kind of sometimes unnecessary things too, but that still gives us a flavor of life and makes us see beauty in so many ways. Again, an example I use in the book is cut flowers. Cut flowers are, they give that little extra sensibility to a room. They are biodegradable, which is good, but the whole industry behind them, unfortunately, is not very nice, but they do give us, at their best, a sensibility for a room and a pleasure to a meeting because we have the flowers on the table. That is just something that is just this little extra that gives us a sense of aliveness, and feeling that we are close to something that we have given an occasion that little special attention. And we are then sort of attuning our sensibilities to those beauties. And I think that is something that we perhaps don't see or don't pay so much attention to, and in the realm of fashion too, because we look so much at spectacles. We look so much at, wow, have you seen that latest awesome mud bath drop or whatever it is, like some sort of super cool thing. But we very rarely just see each other and that little beautiful thing that comes out from seeing someone and feeling someone that has that just little energy of a life and of a good day that just makes people feel, wow, I want to share that, and I see you. I'm, that. I don't know if I really answered that, but
Isn't this fun? Now you know why I like to have coffee with Otto every. Desire, striving and seeking of acknowledgement, the want and need to flourish, to self-express, to grow personally, collectively, together. You describe all these different kinds of self-sustaining practices in fashion, and you have, beyond the language of production, consumption, overconsumption, and waste, you like to poetically think of it as vistas, the social, the elemental, the imaginal. Could you explain to the audience a little bit about what you mean by this, how it ties to life-sustaining practices in fashion?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I take this idea of the three vistas, or from the three ecologies of Felix Guattari, and in the three ecologies, Guattari is sort of arguing for how our discussions around ecology is mainly focused on the environment and sustaining the environment, taking care of the environment, and so on. And we don't. But he argues that we miss out how the natural environment is sort of linked to other ecologies then, a social ecology and a mental ecology. And I sort of call these, just to slice it slightly differently, an elemental ecology which contains the elements, but also atoms and materials, and a relational ecology that, is our social relations and so on, and the imaginal relation, which is sort of our psychological life, if you want to say so. Guattari's argument, like why it's so hard for us to sustain and make our living ecology of the world, the environment and sustainable, is because it's linked, it's intrinsically linked to our social ecologies and our mental ecologies. Meaning that in order for me to feel good about myself in my psychological life, I need to buy more stuff in the way that consumerism works, And I do this in competition with other consumers, which is the social ecology, and that has effects onto the natural ecology or the environmental ecology. So we cannot think that we can just like solve ecology and the industrial system if we don't also think that we must actually engage with our social life and think about how do we rethink the way that competition, capitalism, and so on, of course, infiltrates our social life. But also how these values and these systems have also, of course, infiltrated our sense of self, our self-esteem, our feeling of self-worth. All those things are deeply entrenched into consumerism and goods and competition. So what Guattari argues is we cannot just solve one ecology, but we need to take a holistic view and try to solve all these three ecologies together. I try to take a similar approach then. So what can we learn from Guattari when we look at fashion and sustainability? We're not going to have a sustainable fashion system if we also do not try to sort of rethink and redesign the way we work socially with fashion and the way that we mentally and sort of imaginally work with fashion and have a sense of our self-esteem. Again, this means that we must rethink the way that we teach fashion designers, meaning that it's not only about producing goods. Again, you can think of yourself more like a hairdresser, someone who offers a service, someone who creates environments in which people feel that they socially see and practice other forms of togetherness, but through the tools that we teach at fashion school, meaning dress and, and how we look to each other, the aesthetics and so on. But also we must also include there how actually our dreams, how our sense of self-worth and so on is actually deeply tied to this. So we also need actually to help cultivate and think of, how can we teach people self-esteem, courage, these things that make you feel that you can, feel good about yourself. Because it is as if we have this kind of elephant in the room, I often feel in fashion, where we don't, we create these designers that are leaders, that are visionaries, that are, that are influencers of, editors, what they're going to be, But they, in order to be that, they need followers, They need, inherent in the way that we think of fashion is that there needs to be leaders and followers. And in order for us to follow, you need to be fearful, you need to be anxious. You don't necessarily sort of follow just out of the joy of following. So the byproduct of the whole ecology of fashion is also, it thrives on anxiety, it thrives on our unfortunate sort of bad self-esteem and really the lowest emotions, if you want to say so, that we don't necessarily want to reproduce in a society. And I feel we don't take that seriously enough in the world of fashion education, I feel. Now, so what I'm trying to take with these three vistas is a more sort of holistic view on what, how should we think of acting and what does it mean to be a fashion designer in these, in the social relational realm or in the imaginal realm, meaning that you are much more, instead of being a mass-producing kind of artist engineer in the sense of what we are perhaps teaching our students to be, how could we teach our students to be more like a coach or more like a doctor, more like having a clinical relation almost with their user? Like, how do you feel? What is bothering you? Can I help you? I'm a fashion designer. I can help you redesign this. And I see you, user. It is not about me as a fashion designer, I'm so cool, and I'm also a DJ, and I'm also all these kind of awesome things that you just want to buy part of me. But it's like, how do I see you? And I see that you are a person and you're suffering. Let me help you in the way that I can. And again, also in the mental realm, perhaps we need to learn from more type of sort of spiritual practices and so on, where it's actually about building up people, making people grow emotionally and, interiorly, if you want to say so, rather than sort of just thrive on their lowest days where they have to go and shop my stuff to feel better about themselves. So that's why I feel these kind of three ecologies or these three vistas may just help us see that aliveness in that sense comes in so many different ways, and it comes in so many different expressions. So we don't need to tie aliveness to more and more goods or less or so on. So yeah, if that answers your question, Christina.
Thank you, Otto. Do I have time for one more question? Okay, maybe this is the last one. Since we're running out of time, I want to make sure you all have a chance to speak with Otto too and join our conversation. As you were speaking, I was thinking, and I'm still learning, there was a time when I had to really develop the skills on my left hand to make the critique and to act, to be able to do that and do that well. But on the other hand, I realized with time that I also need nourishment, and I need what I really truly feel at the heart of fashion, which is a sense of togetherness. And it's a word that I constantly think of when it comes to fashion with a big F, fashion with a small f, fashion in any language that's out there. And so I wondered, perhaps on a final note, because I think we talk a lot about that, and it's really, I'm so grateful, it's really deep in our friendship. This sense of togetherness, we've used in the past the word interconnectedness and interbeing, that we are trying so hard to make visible in the kind of work we do with each other, with our students, in understanding this rapidly, or in understanding the expansive ways in which we can approach fashion. And if you could just have some final words on togetherness, I would be so grateful.
I mean, the way I connect it to fashion is that in the way that we think of fashion, default-wise, is that we buy ourselves togetherness, in so many ways. We buy ourselves into a certain subculture, we buy ourselves into, another social class if possible, and so on, and the only sort of means that we sort of habitually use and teach in so many ways is to use the detour over the economy and over commodity society and consumerism in order to experience togetherness. Whereas I feel like, perhaps in our everyday life, at best again, of course, I hope that most of us feel togetherness in such a wider sense, where we also can put trust and other types of social emotions into the togetherness. It's not only a sort of a symbolic togetherness in that sense, but it's something where we put ourselves at risk a little bit, we share vulnerabilities, and we share a sense of growth, perhaps because our vulnerabilities, because we dare to open that little window to the soul through which our real life, if you want to say so, or I don't want to say deeper, but it's well, whatever, what we're going to call it. How can we think of fashion also as practiced in something that would have more of that? How can we do these things more together? How can we have this sense that we also teach this in fashion school, where I think we end up either in a sort of a cold, sort of cynical distance to it, or we end up in a very sort of critical anxiety and about it, or of course we end up in the sort of the competitive type of, I'm going to be the coolest and do the most awesome stuff. But how could we actually train ourselves in togetherness, meaning that we would have more moments in education to where these elements take place, and where we actually are allowed to share on a deeper level, and that is like, how do we I think the little I've seen now at the conference seems that, here we have some steps on trying to figure this, or trying to practice this, rather than, the type of classical conference where you have someone preaching out and then someone, how do we cook more together? How do we spend more time together where we actually have the possibility of seeing each other on a deeper level, and feel that our ideas are growing in this sense of shared curiosity and deep concern for each other's ideas, rather than perhaps this kind of competitive academic clash of perspectives where we are, so how do we practice togetherness? We need more of that, I think. And I think that we can have much more of that if we rethink the way that we practice and conceive what fashion education is, and where fashion lives in our social world. That was a long answer again, Christina, but thank you.
Otto, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.
It is actually now 3:45, and I'm so sorry to say that we've run out of time for a Q&A. I've selfishly taken up all the airtime with you, Otto. I will be sticking around informally if anybody has any further questions, and perhaps there's a way also to be in touch with Otto as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this conversation, by being here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Christina, I think the image of the hairdresser and the baker will probably resonate and rest with many of us here. And Christina, this impetus on togetherness and how we live togetherness also. So thank you so much. Thank you, Otto, for joining us. Next time in person, I say.
Yeah.
The best in New York. We will now move into our final collaborative session, session 4. And there are different formats. There's a paper exchange, there's a film session that will take place here. There are a number of workshops. There's one workshop I want to single out because it was supposed to take place yesterday, but I think Sarah and Luke got stuck, and I think traveled for something like, 30 hours or something to make it to the conference. So you get praise for persistency to come to defashioning education. And their Fit But You Know It walking workshop is taking place now in the session and starts on the ground floor in 002. We put the cards on your chairs because we are now also doing this Reflections Actions workshop. So if there's anything, any immediate action for Monday, any long-term action for the year to come that you want to note down, please